Jerry Meisner, 2nd Ward Alderman, West Peoria. I would ask both candidates, getting away from history for a moment, to state your criteria as regards plea bargaining. So I've had people in my district talk about in the past. I just wondered if that was a big item with either of you gentlemen, or what your stance is on that, okay?
It's a good question, and something I've talked about in this race. First of all, I mentioned to you the crime problems that Peoria County has, and I think we need to be more aggressive on that. One of the first things I announced when I was running for this position 10 months ago was put out a 5-point plan, and I said we have to reevaluate the entire plea bargaining system. And what does that mean? I mean, I'm not talking about eliminating all plea agreements. You can't do that. That'll clog up the system. But what you need to do is, when you look at some of these gangbangers and thugs that cause most of the problems in our county and in our city, you have to do something differently. A couple things that I've talked about doing differently that aren't being done. One is, you get caught with a gun in a violent offense, you're not getting a plea agreement. That's not going to shut down the whole system. It's one way to look at it. If you're a 2-time violent convicted felon, you're not getting a plea agreement. I tell people all the time, these gangbangers and thugs are not scared to be prosecuted at that courthouse. When you walk through that courthouse, you should be scared to death to walk through there. And talk to the cops. They'll tell you, nobody's scared to walk in that courthouse. It's a revolving door. And I don't necessarily blame that all on him, but you have to be more aggressive. And plea bargaining is part of it. And what I just said, 2 small initiatives. Let's try it for 6 months. Let's try it for a year. See if it makes a difference. We have to do something differently. The status quo is not working. Second thing I've talked about doing as far as plea bargaining is, we have to reevaluate the whole system from misdemeanors on up. And I'm not talking about eliminating them, but it has to be looked at. Because we have the problems we have now, we have to do things differently. Something I'm supportive of, and something that I'm going to do if I'm elected state attorney.
I would say that it's hard for the public to appreciate, or at least to evaluate, a plea agreement. We call them plea agreements because it's 2 parties agree to something that the court puts its stamp of approval on. Plea bargain connotes that somebody got some sort of a break of some type, when in fact most defendants come into a plea agreement holding their nose and being dragged kicking and screaming through it because they think it's worse than they ought to get, and so on and so forth. But I think that the way to compare it is to compare Peoria County with other counties. And the way that you do that is to look at how many trials comparable counties had. In other words, a plea agreement, which would mean that the parties agreed to something and the judge said okay, would not result, of course, in a trial, a bench trial or a jury trial. So you would go to the figures from the people in our district, Rock Island County, LaSalle County, Will County, even Sangamon County. You would go to the figures there and say, how many cases were appealed, which would be each case of guilty after a jury trial or even a bench trial. How many cases were appealed? And you would see those figures, and you would find a county similar, not on point to size of Peoria, Rock Island, for example, and you will find that the number of trials held in Peoria is enormous compared to the number of trials in comparable sized cities or counties of Illinois. Sangamon County, Champaign County, even maybe McLean County, which is somewhat smaller. But you would say that that means that the plea agreements that occur in those places do not occur with the frequency that they do in Peoria. Those cases go to trial. And you can only push so much through the pipeline. You know, it's the old gallon jug routine. You can have a gallon jug, but you could have 2 gallons of cases. You're only going to get a gallon of them in there. So how much can you push it through and do it with reason? That's what we do. And so Peoria's, not just reputation, Peoria's measured result for cases that are tried is much greater than all other counties that would either be from Winnebago down. Let me then say this. But I have an opponent who, I don't know where that map is that he's passed around here, but I have an opponent who continues to say this phrase, that we have the highest crime rate in the past 5 years. but he's referring to years that are 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, and the year of the map, 2005. He moved to Peoria in 2006. So I'm not suggesting to you that in fact what is good today was not then, but we've got to talk about relevant dates and boundaries. So to say we have the highest crime rate in the past 5 years, it's simply untrue, and it's an apples and oranges sort of comparison. But I want you to know that the cases that move through this system are not moved through with plea agreements that are in some way small. Every plea agreement in this county is approved, must be approved, and has been approved by a judge. And they have the ability to say, I'm not doing that, back to the bargaining table.
Thank you. David, if I could just respond to the map, please.
Well, should he? Yeah, well, okay.
The only thing I would say,
short?
Yep, absolutely. This has 2005 on it, but I tell everybody, go to the Illinois State Police website and go 2004 to 2008, and you look at 102 counties in the state of Illinois, and we're 102 out of 102. It's not 2001 through 2005. The Illinois State Police website that keeps track of all cases throughout this state, and do the analysis. We're 102 out of 102 in that 5-year period. And again, this map just illustrates all 102 counties and where we're at. And again, that's where I get those statistics. These aren't mine. This is Illinois State Police.
Thank you. You and then you. State your name, please.
Paula Ferguson. Mr. LaHood, when I moved to Peoria 3 years ago, I inquired about a court advocacy program. The city I came from, I was a court advocate for my neighborhood. And I was told the state's attorney's office here did not support court advocates, and I would love to hear why. What is your position on court advocates?
You know, having worked in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and Tazewell County State's Attorney's Office, and in the federal level we don't necessarily have that, but I'm supportive of it. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a positive thing for our system, and I'm supportive of it, and I've been supportive of it for the last 10 months since I announced.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by a court advocate. Do you mean with a person who does what?
We would represent the victims' families as a neighborhood. Sometimes they didn't have anyone else there to support them in court. We would go to court on liquor license issues. We would go to court if somebody continually had a misdemeanor and was let off continually, to put some pressure that we can't keep letting this person go.
You mean as a to be an advocate for that person, or to
For the
that
neighborhood.
issue?
It would be for the neighborhood.
Well, I think that court advocates that advocate for a position, prostitution, I think, is probably an example. Underage drinking would be an example. Maybe crime in a certain area would be an example. I think that it's always good to have a group that advocates and brings attention to something that is bad. The notion that a rising tide raises all ships is correct. People that become involved to help some things help all of us. But I also understand that the state's attorney's office, being a unit of government, like it or not, has to walk a very delicate line with some things, so that what it does is to not take the role of a person and their likes, but takes the facts of the case and sees whether or not it applies to the law. So pushing an issue or pushing an idea is different than prosecuting a case. But I think that it has its place in the system. Many times in the civil system, I think it's embraced more than a criminal system.